Adrian Rudafi.
Kia ora noa e te māngai o te whare. Sir, I was looking forward to speaking on the education legislation bill. In particular, I want to start off with charter schools. I want to start there because charter schools have been an absolute failure for the education system in New Zealand, and I'll point out to you exactly why. Charter schools are based on a philosophy around privatisation and commercialisation of our education system. It has no place in New Zealand, I believe. Here's some statistics. In 2014, it cost $7.345 million to educate for 1 year 619 students. Now, if we were to use that kind of funding for every state school in New Zealand, we would expect a lot more achievement than the charter schools are achieving in 2014. And so that model, which I'm really worried about, and I'll go back to my favourite quote of submissions to express my point around why I believe that it is taking incremental steps towards privatisation or allowing for the privatisation of our education system. The New Zealand Principal Federation said, on the surface, they might be described as a collection of ill-conceived, baseless changes which lack any intelligent rationale. They might otherwise be described as changes without openly expressed rationale, yet intended to enable further expansion of certain policies and direction. Well, I absolutely agree with that, and I'll make this point. Not only have they been a failure, under this bill allows charter schools to be operated by tertiary institutes. Well, that's not core business for those tertiary organisations. Why would you allow a tertiary organisation to run a primary school or a secondary school as a charter school? So another point I want to make is that charter schools are allowed to make a profit. And when was making a profit, even though they are trusts, and we were told that they were going to be in partnership with organisations. Well, the organisations didn't actually step up, not the organisations that were originally talked about when charter schools were first came into law. But who's put up their hands? It's trusts and others, but they are still able to operate on a surplus and use those funds the way that they want to. And we think that's unfair. It is unfair to all of the schools in my electorate, in every electorate, whose funding in this year's budget is effectively being reduced. Now, I'll go back to my other point. If they were funded at the same level that charter schools are funding it, we'd have a whole lot of very happy schools out there, but they're not. So that tells me there's a huge inequity between the way education is funded in New Zealand. So I want to talk about principals running multiple schools. Principals are the professional leaders of their schools, for their staff and for their school community. They're often the leaders within their communities as well. Now, if they have the burden of having to run multiple schools, I wonder how they can effectively not only be the professional leader of their school, but also have the valued relationships that every principal should have in their community. For example, it's a requirement that they have a relationship with their Māori community, with iwi. Now, if they're running 3 or 4 schools and they've got a number of iwi that they need to be consulting with, then I would say that that relationship is going to be watered down. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that that relationship is going to end up that the principal and their management of those schools will end up making generic decisions across all of the schools that they manage. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing. It might be good for 1 or 2 schools, but you can almost guarantee that it won't be good for all of the schools. And so I've got concerns about that. I've got concerns about how parents have to manage looking after their children if they have children that are going to different schools, primary, intermediate and secondary. And that's been pointed out, and we still haven't had, I believe, this House hasn't had an adequate answer on how that will be managed. And I've heard, and I will acknowledge the statements that members opposite have made, that it is dependent upon consultation. Can I tell the House, sir, that consultation with members of my constituency is very difficult. And if you're having to run 3 schools and consult effectively with people enrolled on the Te Tai Hauauru electorate, then I would say to you, you're going to have that the consultation by that one principal will have to involve a whole lot of door knocking. Now, we know from experience that the consultation that is run in schools and in other organisations is not always effective in reaching key stakeholders in those schools. And so I believe that because of that, decisions will be made that are made by those who are engaged and not those who are not engaged. And I have a concern about that. The new teacher position, the trainee teachers, and I support the statements that my colleague Jenny Salesa has said about parents having options. Now, we heard in the speeches opposite that it's all about parents having options. Well, really? Do you think parents will truly choose a trainee teacher over a registered qualified teacher? I think that where trainee teachers are sent into schools, that they ought to be closely monitored as they are now. And that is an acceptable program of training within schools, and I acknowledge that. But self-charge with no overview, and perhaps from a principal with multiple schools that they're looking after, yeah, I'm not sure about that. In fact, I am sure about that. It won't work. Can I finish, sir, on the part that of this bill, and it's made up of a number of other parts that have been amended, and I wanted to in particular speak to the Ngāti Mu VC 28th Māori Battalion Memorial Scholarship Fund. That is a part of the bill that I do support. Unfortunately, because of all the other things that I do not agree with, we won't be voting for this bill. But I did want to acknowledge the Minister for the work on this particular act, and to acknowledge the whānau of Te Moananui a Kiwa Ngārimu, and the legacy that he and the legacy of the 28th Māori Battalion has had in the education of young people in New Zealand by providing scholarships so that they can get a very good education. Nō reira e mihi ana au ki tōna whānau, nō reira tēnā tātou.